So today's webinar is Volunteer Monitoring Starting Strong. And before I dive into my portion of the presentation, I wanted to provide a context as to why we chose this topic for today's webinar. First, at the last National Monitoring Conference that took place in Tampa in 2016, there was a good deal of interest from the volunteer monitoring community in attendance at that conference, looking for those key building blocks for starting a volunteer monitoring program. In addition, there's been increasing conversations taking place on various listservs about how to build credibility, data credibility into citizen science projects, and thought because there was a need from both audiences that we would focus on some of the key tools that we use in volunteer monitoring to start our programs strong. So our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about volunteer monitoring and give a light introduction to some of the different types of volunteer monitoring models taking place across the nation. And then we're going to hone in on a couple of the key tools, key pillars within the volunteer monitoring field, study design and quality assurance project plans. To get started, a little bit about who I am and ALLARM. The Alliance for Aquatic Resource Monitoring is a 31-year-old aquatic citizen science organization housed in Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And we do direct assistance in Pennsylvania and New York. And our mission as an organization is to put science in the hands of communities to evaluate the health of their waterways and use those data for local protection and restoration efforts. Danielle, I'll let you introduce the Izaak Walton.
Thanks, Julie. So I am the Clean Water Program Director, as Candace had mentioned, for the Izaak Walton League of America. We are a conservation-based organization, and our interests really do rely on protecting natural resources and promoting outdoor recreation. We have 43,000 members across the nation, well over 200 chapters, and our flagship program that we started in 1969 is called Save Our Streams, which is a program that has gone national, and there are many organizations that use different versions of Save Our Streams.
Excellent. Thank you, Danielle. To move forward in the presentation, we're not going to spend too much time on this, but wanted to discuss the context of volunteer monitoring in the citizen science umbrella. If those of you on the line were able to join our August webinar looking at the field of citizen science and volunteer monitoring, you know, you're familiar with this conversation. And for those of you who weren't able to join the August 2016 webinar on citizen science and volunteer monitoring, check out the archived presentations, and you can get more information about that. So as a whole, citizen science is a fantastically booming network of community-based science taking place all around the world. And some of the stats that I have heard for North America is that there are over 5,000 programs engaging 100 million people. And when you look at the field of citizen science, you can view it as an umbrella of networks, because citizen science programs can take very many different forms. And you know, one of the things that we have on this slide and talk about is that volunteer monitoring, or aquatic citizen science, which has been around for many decades, is one of those networks within this larger network of citizen science. But it is so amazing that we have this shared goal of collecting data that makes an impact. And when I think about 100 million people engaging citizen science in North America, that's really exciting to me. When you look at the national volunteer monitoring movement, and if those of you are familiar with Chris Stepanek's work at the University of Vermont, please check that out. She's done some really great research looking at different volunteer monitoring models, so check out that work. But when you look at the National Volunteer Monitoring Program, we have a relatively rich history. Some of the older programs, the oldest programs date back to the 60s, and we have active programs today. Again, this is where communities or individual volunteers are involved in data collection on water quality and water quantity. According to the research that Chris has done, 48 out of 50 states have active programs. There are over 1,700 volunteer monitoring programs across the nation, and they engage 1.3 million people. So for those of you who are looking to start your own volunteer monitoring initiative, we thought it would be helpful to take some time to look at some of the models of volunteer monitoring. And it's really important to underscore that you can't fit volunteer monitoring neatly into boxes. So even as Danielle and I were talking about some of these different models, you see a lot of overlap in a lot of different programs and how programs are run. But to give a sense of things, we're going to call out a few different examples. So one example is the collectors model. If you're familiar with the citizen science models, this is close to the contributory model, with the idea that volunteers are collecting specimens. Like, for example, the Maryland Department of Natural Resources has the fantastic Stream Waders program, where volunteers collect macroinvertebrates and then send them to Maryland DNR for analysis. So the volunteers are collecting the samples and the state is doing the analysis. Another example of a program I learned about at the National Monitoring Conference was the phosphorus monitoring program taking place through the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Through this program, volunteers collected water samples, and then those samples were sent to certified labs for phosphorus analysis and then used by the state for their integrated reports. So that's an example of a contributory or collectors model approach within volunteer monitoring. Another example of how volunteer monitoring takes place, and again looking at streams and rivers, is where you have a set program that is standardized and you see people following the same methods in the state. So great examples of these types of programs, Georgia Adopt a Stream and Missouri Stream Team, where the volunteers collect the samples and do the analysis, and you see diverse data being used by communities and the state. Another example, and I'm using the terminology from the citizen science field, is the co-created approach, where volunteers are engaged in all aspects of the scientific process. So one of the tools we're going to be talking about today is the study design process, which originated out of River Network by Jeff Dates. And so I'll spend some time during my part of the presentation going through those steps. Another great example of the co-created approach is James Beckley and the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality has this amazing monitoring methods manual that walks you through, if you're looking to have your data used by X, Y, or Z, this is the type of methodology you need to use for X, Y, and Z parameters. And so that allows people to build their programs with suggestions about what equipment and things like that to use. The co-created approach is also an approach that ALLARM takes when working with communities in Pennsylvania and New York. Finally, I'm going to touch on a little bit with lake, estuaries, and oceans. You often see a combination of community members collecting samples and doing field work and analysis, but also collecting samples that are sent to certified labs. So this is really common with lake programs where you see that hybrid approach of volunteers collecting and doing analysis in the field as well as sending the samples to certified labs. You also see that in folks doing bay work and in ocean work as well. So one of the things when you talk about these building blocks of starting strong, I want to talk about the role of a service provider. So for those of you who are on the webinar today, and you might be a service provider, you might be a state agency coordinator, or you might be an organization that mission is to do this. There are also some models out there where the state will contract entities to provide technical support to community groups interested in collecting water quality data. And Extension also has a rich history of playing that role of service provider and facilitating these processes. But this is it's a great relationship to have where you have someone that's familiar with these processes and can help facilitate community groups going through the scientific process and providing resources at different stages. So when you take a look at the technical support model here, oftentimes it starts with that community concern, and then the community concern gets connected to an entity that provides technical assistance. At that point, it's up to the community to decide whether or not collecting scientific data is useful to achieving their goals, in which case they'll develop a study design and a quality assurance project plan. Then they'll go through monitoring trainings, do data collection and quality verification, do data interpretation, and finally use their data to achieve what their intended goal is. So when you think about tools like the study design process, there's some really key ways in which the service provider collaborates with the community partner. So in looking at this study design wheel and these 10 steps, I have it color-coded. So the first 3 steps in yellow, these are really answers that the community organization needs to define, especially why they are monitoring and how they intend to use the data. The steps that are color-coded in blue are where the service provider is able to, take what the questions are, take the intended data use, and then start helping to populate a monitoring plan with suggested parameters and suggested methodology, and also suggestions around quality assurance, quality control. And then for the blocks that are colored in green, this is where both the community organization and the service provider are working together to help make these determinations about the monitoring plan. So it's, I have the how we use the data circled, and that leads to some of the monitoring mantras that we have in our field. One is that all data of known quality have use, and 2, you must match the intended use with the quality of data collected. So when you're looking at that study design process, you have to think through all the different ways that you want to use your data so it can inform the different quality assurance that you need to build into your program. So let's hop into what is a study design. So a study design is a written document that describes the choices you make about monitoring. And we say it is the most important step of monitoring at ALLARM. So like you saw on that wheel before, it's the who, what, where, whys of your monitoring program. Why is a study design needed? Again, it helps root communities in the scientific process and making sure that they are developing question-driven monitoring programs. It helps bring a focus to what the goals are around data collection. It's also a great document to articulate the methodology and the QA/QC practices. And this is especially important because we work with volunteers. And so you might have your study design team, your cohort of volunteers that help flesh out the monitoring plan, and that might be different than the people who are actually going out and collecting and analyzing the data. The other thing is we all know in working with volunteers is that volunteers ebb and flow, as people leave the program or as new people come into a monitoring program, having a study design in place really offers that continuity so that people understand what were the goals of the program when this got set up, and then it takes you through what the monitoring plan is. And we have a great lesson learned here in Pennsylvania about, why a tool like study design is so important. And Pennsylvania has a rich history of volunteer monitoring dating back to the mid-'80s. And at our state Department of Environmental Protection, they established a citizen volunteer monitoring program in 1996. And then we had this amazing funding initiative in Pennsylvania that came out of our Department of Environmental Protection called the Growing Greener Initiative. And over the course of almost a decade, over $1.5 billion were given out in grants to do restoration projects, to form watershed associations, and things like that. So this is a great resource to do wonderful work for our water resources in Pennsylvania. And one of the things they funded in the early days of this grant initiative was the formation of watershed associations. And we started to see these watershed associations forming across the state, and a lot of them were starting to do monitoring, but a lot of programs hadn't thought through study design, and we're out collecting data without proper quality assurance measures, and there was a lot of programs that had to be revamped and data that had to be shelved and not used. So in response to that, in 2001, a consortium of service providers formed, the Consortium for Scientific Assistance to Watersheds, came together as an entity to provide free technical assistance to watershed associations and entities doing stream monitoring to make sure that people had access to these tools, and also at the same time the Department of Environmental Protection Citizen Volunteer Monitoring Program was working with River Network to create a tailored study design manual for the state of Pennsylvania, and that was released in 2002 and is a key tool within CSOL and working with community groups. So it's always important to think through these steps. So let's dive into the steps. So again, study design is one of these great examples of starting strong with volunteer monitoring. The first thing that we do, ALLARM does when we work with a new group, is to sit down and talk about the organization's major objectives. Because it's important as an entity, whether it's a municipality or a county conservation district or a watershed association or you name it, to think about how volunteer monitoring and collecting data on waterways fits into the program's mission and major initiatives. So in short, it's very important at that first stage to think through how does monitoring help you achieve your organizational goals. If at this point it's identified that data collection does help an organization achieve its goals, then you move on into the next question. Number 2, why are you monitoring? So as a service provider, this question is really challenging because it's at this stage typically when I'm sitting in a room with our monitoring sub-team that's focused on the study design that they look at me and they say, Julie, what do you think we should monitor? Why should we monitor? And it's a really delicate process as a service provider to make sure that the community is sitting in the driver's seat. And so it's always putting it back onto them to be like, no, this is your monitoring program. This is your watershed. What are your concerns? And then you go through a process of everyone highlighting what their watershed concerns are, and then you go through a prioritization process to help inform those questions that monitoring will help answer. Once you've gone through that step, this is that step that I had circled before. How will you use the data collected? Are you looking to use the data to do local education? Are you looking to use the data to do pollution screening or identify sites for restoration? Are you looking to have the data used for the state integrated reports? It's really important right from the get-go that you inform the action you plan on taking with the data because that will inform the quality of data needed and your quality assurance measures as well. From there, we move on to a lot of fun parts. People often like to jump to step 4 and 5 right from the beginning, and we have to slow them down and say, we add one step at a time. But this is something that a lot of people come to the table thinking about already. What will you monitor? Looking at the watershed indicators that will help answer your question, and you can explore looking at biological, chemical, and physical characteristics. And at this point, we start having to take into account very practical considerations. So in Pennsylvania, with the watershed associations that I work with, their average budget is about $2,000 to $3,000 because these are entities who are 100% volunteer. And so it's really important that we think through the human and financial resources that are coming into the volunteer monitoring program. As your other practical considerations is how difficult is it to monitor a particular indicator? Does it help you understand a major component of the ecosystem? And these are things in conversations that the service provider helps facilitate when you're looking at what will you monitor. Once you've identified the indicators, then you move into the how will you monitor. And so that explicitly gets into your parameters that help answer your monitoring questions, and then your specific methodology. And so, like I say on this slide, it's in determining the appropriate analytical methods that meet your data objectives. So some things that you have to think through are, accuracy and precision. ALLARM spends a lot of time testing volunteer-friendly equipment so that we can make the best recommendation to our volunteers. And so we're continually testing kits, looking at meters, and there's going to be certain parameters where you're going to make, if people are really concerned about metals or acid mine drainage is an issue within our state and it's important to have metals, you're going to want to send those samples to a certified lab. Other things you think about in your methodology is, are these grab samples, integrated samples, direct measurement samples, and then how are you doing your net collection? And another thing that we populate in the study design is looking at, your holding times, reporting units, and things like that. From there, we go to the where will you monitor. Depending on the question, this will inform the location of monitoring sites. As a service provider, it's really important that you keep bringing up things like safety and accessibility, thinking through things like having reference locations and streams with diverse designated uses, looking at your best of best streams and streams that aren't ranked as highly. And this map is a little bit fuzzy, but it looks at, are you looking at first order, second order, third order? And then within if you're looking at a stream location, for example, where within the stream are you sampling? When will you monitor? This gets at what time of year. So if you're doing a combination of biological and physical sampling, that's not necessarily something you do on a monthly basis. Some programs do, but what time of year is best for going out and looking at your bug diversity? What time of day should you be going out? Are there special weather conditions? We've had some volunteers be concerned with developments and wanting to capture, stormwater runoff. And with that, then you need to be thinking about those special weather conditions. And then you need to think through the frequency of sampling. And again, this is where that partnership with the monitoring entity and the service provider is really helpful in answering these questions. What are your quality assurance measures? In a study design, you start thinking through the different quality assurance measures, but really this is that complementary piece to the quality assurance project plans that Danielle is going to talk about. But this is a crucial piece. You have to think through training. You have to think through your equipment care and calibration. This is where you are ensuring that the data are credible. And, from study design to your data sheets, documentation, or metadata is really important to be thinking about. The ninth step was getting into how will you manage and present your data. So that gets at, are you collecting data in data sheets and then you're putting that into an Excel? Are you collecting in data sheets and putting that into an online database? Then thinking through what your interpretation measures are going to be. If you're setting up Excel sheets, you can set that up to do some statistical analysis. And thinking through lightly what your communication plan is. But as you're collecting data and you're doing analysis, those steps of interpretation and communication get fleshed out further within the monitoring process. And then finally, the last step within study design are what are the tasks and who will do them? Oftentimes when we're working with a group that is embarking on volunteer monitoring for the first time, it's really helpful for us to be like, hey, don't forget you're going to need to have a program coordinator. Or hey, you're going to need an equipment guru in your group to make sure that if you have reagents that are expiring, that they're coordinating with the other volunteers and getting those reagents out and replacing them with new ones. And so here's a litany of tasks for volunteer positions that you might be suggesting to the watershed group to consider. All right, so those are the 10 steps in study design process, and now I'm going to hand it over to Danielle.
Thanks, Julie. So I just want to make sure I'm not off mute. Does everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, yeah, the brief overview, the 10 steps, they do make sense when you sit down and work through them, and it's something that I like to utilize also. It's a very valuable tool to make sure that everybody up front knows what they're doing, why they're doing it, and they're constantly connecting it back to the reason why they started in the first place. When you're deciding what you want to monitor and for what purposes and rolling through the study design process, that one key component is also to be aware of the resources that you have. And you'll see here this slide has been used often. I don't know if you've seen it before, but if you haven't, the idea is that, you know, there are different types of monitoring reasons. Some folks are monitoring because they want to raise awareness within their watershed. Other folks are monitoring because they want to assess if a stream is healthy or unhealthy. And then there are others that want to be able to fill in data gaps that they see with their local, regional, state, or federal agencies. So as you move from environmental education to that more legal, regulatory, you do increase the amount of time that you spend, your scientific rigor, your QA, QC requirements, and the expenses, both the expenses that hit your pocket and hit your time. All right, Julie, you can move on. Thanks. So I wanted to bring this up because it's something that I feel like the volunteer monitoring community has struggled with a bit, especially when we start talking about data use. And if others are interested in utilizing the information that we collected. And I want to stress, and you'll hear us stress again, that it's really important to think about your organization's data use as what you want to use that information for, beyond submitting it to someone else to use. So one of the barriers that we have heard, this is a direct quote from a government worker that is very supportive of volunteer monitoring data. And he said, some government scientists have a lingering bias against volunteer data. We have come a long way, and this is a non-issue in some states, but it remains a significant constraint in other states. And this is why, again, we stress the importance of having that study design, the importance of documenting that who, what, when, where, and why, and then really taking it into the next level as it relates to the quality assurance project planning. So setting the stage for your program. This will come out in your study design process, and I usually like to start with these 3 questions, and they are similar to how Julie starts as well. But why do you want to monitor? You know, what kind of information do you want to get? How do you want that information to be used, and who do you want that information to be used by? Those questions set the stage for that level of rigor and that level of expense and commitment you need to build into your program. Next slide. A tool that is an oldie but a goodie is still the EPA Volunteer Monitoring Quality Assurance Project Planning tool. This tool is available online still. You can Google it. You can also find links to it off of the resources that we provide at the end of this presentation. But really, this walks you through the steps of everything that you need to put into a quality assurance project plan to make your data of a known quality so that you know how to use it, and if others want to use it, they can use it as well. So let's just talk about the differences quickly through study design and quality assurance project planning, because there is sometimes confusion over, well, can we do one or the other? Do we need to do both? And again, if you look at the study design, it's really outlining the objectives of the project, the data users, and the rationale for your design. Why are you doing the study? Why did you pick certain sites? From there, that quality assurance project planning side really focuses on what methods are you going to use in the field? What are your analytical methods once that data comes in? How are you going to analyze it? What are those data requirements you need based on what you wanted that data to be used for? If you have issues when you're collecting samples in the field, what are the corrective actions that you take for that sample, for that data? And then there's other pieces in there, such as the chain of custody, if you're using a certified lab for the water quality analysis, and also touching on data storage and data validation. But it's really important for you to take ownership of your own data. So this is a picture that is an oldie but goodie. This is a picture of someone's cubicle in the state agency that I used to work for. And he was in charge of getting all outside data, including volunteer data, in for the agency to look at for assessment. And I show this slide because, well, number one, you see that there's a lot of data, there's a lot of paper, but to me, putting your data, just sending it off to the state agency for data use, you're really not connecting it back to your community needs. And we really want you to take ownership of your data instead of having your data come in and sit on someone's desk or get put in a report that sits on a shelf. So at the Izaak Walton League, we currently really focus in on the biological monitoring. We have our original Save Our Streams protocol. That protocol really started in 1969 and was built out through the 70s. And it was really a program designed for education and raising people's awareness about the life in the stream. And there were questions that came out of this program, such as, you know, is this type of information and data collected? Can it be something that can be used for use beyond just environmental education programs? And you'll see at the bottom of the slide a study that I referenced in 2002, but this was a game changer for us in the sense that they looked at if biological volunteer monitoring can accurately assess the conditions of the streams. And they used the original Save Our Streams protocol, which was just solely based on if there was a presence or absence of a macroinvertebrate, of a taxa. And what they found was, in the original Save Our Streams protocol, that 35% of the samples were not in agreement, meaning when they compared it to professional data and that result, there was no agreement. Also, we realized that the original Save Our Streams protocol was oversimplifying our analysis. And really what it was doing was it was artificially bumping up the health of the stream to make it look a little bit better than it should be. One of the big key recommendations that came out of this was that it was recommended that we have a standardized protocol with standardized metrics, and we move beyond just looking at presence or absence of what's living in the stream and build in the ability to have a quantitative method for more rigor within our data. So what had happened out of that is something that the Virginia Save Our Streams, this is a group within the state of Virginia. They were originally using the Save Our Streams protocol. They took the lessons learned from that white paper that I mentioned, and they worked through and built in stronger metrics. And with that, we had the multi-metrics index now. It's still a user-friendly stream side assessment tool for volunteers. And it now has, and it has for a while now, an approved quality assurance plan from Virginia DEQ. There are over 280 monitoring locations, and their data, they get passed to Virginia DEQ on an annual basis, so that we are sharing our data with our state agency with the goal that they too can begin closing their data gaps that they have and getting a more holistic picture of what's going on in the watershed. I love this slide. Think about this when you're getting started. Start small, start simple, seek out help, ask a lot of questions, see what others are doing, and go to the workshops and the conferences in your area. And this is advice from Linda Green from University of Rhode Island Watershed Watch. But it's so true. We see time and time again, so many groups are trying to start off really big. They want to monitor bacteria. They want to monitor nutrients. They want to monitor macroinvertebrates. That is wonderful. but what is your starting question? Why do you want to monitor? And really, if it's, for example, that you're concerned about your trout production streams and you're concerned about your trout populations, maybe you can hone in on just a couple of parameters, such as, like, for example, temperature and dissolved oxygen. And maybe that is enough to help determine if that stream can handle and sustain your trout populations. Next slide. So starting out strong. Again, we plan our programs, and this is something that sets us apart, I feel like, meaning sets the volunteer monitoring community, the water volunteer monitoring community, apart from the other citizen science-based programs that we have all been reading about and seeing about. You know, the citizen science-based programs are excellent programs, and we have a version of that here now at Izaak Walton League too. But what stands us apart in volunteer monitoring is that we plan our programs through the study design process. We document the quality through the quality assurance project planning, and we really strive to use the data at the community level, the state level, and at the national level. So this is a story that I want to tell you too, which is talking about moving beyond the numbers and just the value of having volunteers and folks out there looking at their streams, keeping that watchful eye, being the voice of the river, protecting our communities. And this is a photo of a combined sewer overflow. I believe it's on the Raritan River in New Jersey. I could be wrong, but I think it's in that New York, New Jersey harbor area. Combined sewer overflow is when there is, I'm sure you know, but it's when there is a large amount of rain that falls and the sewer system pipes are also connected to the residential home piping systems that go to the sewage treatment plants. And when you get too much rain, the sewage treatment plants cannot handle both the sewage coming from homes and the community, as well as the stormwater coming from the rainfall. So this is a combined sewer overflow. That flap is supposed to be closed during dry weather events, but as you could see, there's a bottle and a bottle cap in there that kept that pipe open, and it was still discharging raw sewage even after the rain event. And this was found by a volunteer. So that's what I mean, moving beyond the numbers. Sometimes the piece is that you have people out there that care about the river and know how to report this information back. So I wanted to, Julie and I wanted to share some of our resources. First and foremost, the National Water Quality Monitoring Council is a wonderful resource for not just volunteer monitoring, but all water quality monitoring in our community. And it's a really great starting place to start looking under the hood and poking around and looking for those getting started resources. Also, USA Volunteer Water Monitoring Network. You'll see there the link there. Another amazing resource, very well set up and very easy to find the information that you need to find as it relates to everything volunteer monitoring. I also think it's important to share with you a couple of listservs that we're all part of that provide us an opportunity to ask questions, to answer questions, and to get our finger on the pulse of the community, which is the EPA Volunteer Monitoring Listserv. The information to subscribe is right there. There's the Extension Listserv, and you'll see the information there as well. And then there's also the Citizen Science Association Listserv. All three of these provide really good information, and we would encourage you to be a part of that. The last thing that I wanted to mention, if you are in might not be the last thing, excuse me, but if you are interested in how some states are utilizing volunteer collected data, Tuesday, March 13th at 2 o'clock, our next webinar, we're going to have speakers from the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, Jody Arthur, James Beckley from Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, and Joe Lattimore from Michigan State University, the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife.